This is College Talk with Dean Aldemaro Romero Jr., a weekly program exploring the lives and work of the people of the Weissman School of Arts and Sciences at Baruch College.
Well, a lot of people talk about psychology these days.
Yes.
But I don't think most people really understand that psychology has many shapes and forms. It's not the typical person sitting next to someone who is laying on a couch and trying to psychoanalyze it. And today we have someone who has a lot of expertise in something called industrial organizational psychology.
Yes.
And this person is Dr. Harold Goldstein, who is a native from Columbus, Ohio. He got his bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Yeah. Very good place. And a master's and doctorate in industrial organization psychology at the University of Maryland at College Park. Yeah. Another place I know well because I did my sabbatical there once.
At Maryland.
And it's basically almost Washington, D.C. You take the subway and takes you there.
Yes.
And today, Professor Goldstein is a professor in the Department of Psychology at the Weissman School of Arts and Sciences, Baruch College City, University of New York. Welcome to College Talk, Dr. Goldstein.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, the first question I usually ask my guests is, why psychology? How come you became a psychologist? What made you intrigued to make of this your career?
That's interesting. Well, it's been a long time since I thought about that, but I was always interested in people. I think I could have maybe done a clinical psychology approach, talking to people about their problems and trying to help them. But at some point I shifted toward more normal pathology in terms of people's backgrounds and issues, and so I ended up in industrial organizational psychology. But I think I always had a bent toward working with people and trying to understand and help them.
Now, the kind of psychology that you practice is unique in itself, and because you're talking about organizations, but at the same time, these organizations are made up of individuals.
Yes.
So you need to kind of combine the aggregated effect of both things. And I was wondering do people really realize that this is something that is mainstream today, that a lot of organizations, especially large organizations, have even several people on a staff full-time who are specialists in this area? Because I don't think most people realize that.
No, I think they don't. I think they don't use the term industrial organizational psychology. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a mouthful. Mm-hmm. It's a difficult term. So I think people don't realize that we overlap a great deal with human capital, human resources, organizational behavior, organizational change. And so if you said those terms, I think people realize that within organizations, you have whole human resource departments, training departments, things like that. But they don't really see IO psychology as kind of an everyday thing that they hear about.
The other thing is, by initially describing IO psychology the way we have done in this show, most people will think, well, that's for big corporations. But in fact, governments, non-profit organizations do have people who work in that particular area. Why do you think we need IO psychologists, for example, in government?
Sure. I think almost in any kind of organization, including nonprofit, I agree, and government, public institutions, either anywhere where you have people, you need people that worry about the human capital, how they perform, helping them to perform effectively. Just like with IT, it doesn't matter what kind of organization you're in, you're going to need somebody with an IT background to try and make sure that the technology systems work well. We take that approach in terms of the people systems. And so as any type of organization values people, they're going to need help from IO psychology and human resource experts.
To what extent do you think that leaders in industry, in government, in other organizations understand the role that you play and are actually inclined to provide you with the resources that you need to do your job, and more importantly, to listen to what you have to say?
Yeah, I think that's been one of the most difficult things. And it's not just them not understanding what we do. It's that we haven't shown the value clearly enough of what we do. And that's been the change the last 5 or 6, maybe 10 years, where we're trying to show the value of people to organizations. As that shift has occurred, I think they listen more. They realize that the people make the place the way it is. that they're a source of competitive advantage for a company that's not easily duplicated. And so sometimes you don't like to talk about people that way, but in some way it's a praise around what people can do for an organization. And so I think as they realize that more, they start to place more value on how they handle their people within their organization.
Now, I was wondering, while listening to you, if in the world where we live, with things are seems to be more automatic, mechanized, digital world, and all kind of things, where there is always this push, this tendency to have fewer human beings generating the product of an organization. Do you feel threatened by that, or do you think that the leadership needs to understand that no matter how computers you have doing certain things, you still need to deal with the human capital?
I think you still need to deal with the human capital, and I also have this faith in human beings that we've always adapted. Even whatever changes have occurred, we've adapted to be useful and helpful and progress and come up with creative solutions and things. And so even though you see AI and you see the changes that are happening in technology that quote unquote replace humans, I do think that humans always adapt and find ways to contribute and produce and accomplish things. And so I guess I still feel like that will happen. And maybe it'll enhance the kinds of things that we do in that way. But certainly others see it as a threat and wonder whether humans will be replaced in some ways.
Certainly, because when you look at AI, that is artificial intelligence, of course you say, will these machines really totally replace me?
Right.
And to be frank with you, I have my doubts.
Right.
There are certain human things, including teaching.
Yes.
That especially for people who don't have the proper background, the wealth, all that sort of things, the human touch, I think, is still indispensable.
Yes.
In all these cases.
I think the way we tend to bring both emotion and intellect to make our decisions is something really unique about humans. And I'm not sure that AI may bring intellect, but they won't have the emotion. And sometimes we talk about removing emotion from our decisions, but I think it's what makes us humans is to have the emotion there. And so maybe that's a piece of unique value that we'll always bring to the table. You know?
I was looking at your impressive list of clients that you have had.
Working in the field.
Working in the field.
Sure.
And I look at the FBI, and that caught my attention because FBI for decades was this pretty much monolithic organization that Edgar Hoover created, and he impressed his personality and ideas about that. And now that's not the case any longer. Right. So tell us about this transformation. Is this something that they realized by themselves, or they had to have experts like you telling them, you need to change?
Yeah, I think they started to realize the value of their own people. And more people talk about that, that the people in your organization are a competitive advantage. They have these capabilities. And you even see, I think that language tends to follow where things go. So the words human capital, just like we talk about financial capital, the words human capital didn't exist, 10, 15 years ago. And so words start to stand for what we bring to the table. Knowledge workers, that the fact is that the workers have knowledge that is of value. Those terms have only come about in the past decade. And I think they point to the fact that organizations see that humans bring certain unique things to the table. I think that makes a big difference.
I recently visited the headquarters of the Central Intelligence Agency because I carry some of Baruch students that were invited to present their ideas about cybersecurity and all that kind of things. And I got really impressed when I saw all throughout the building all these posters and all these announcements about gay, lesbians, transgender, all that sort of thing, showing that they were very open to that they were encouraging people with those lifestyles to become members of the agency, which has a tremendous shift because just a few decades ago, if you were not straight, the agency would say, okay, you are a good target for blackmail. Yeah. I was wondering, to what extent do you think that people in your profession have helped this kind of organizations to make almost a revolutionary change in the way they look at human resources?
Maybe we've helped, or maybe they've just progressed. The leaders have kind of come up in different decades now, and they view humans as more complicated, the complexity of things. They're open more to diversity than we think. And so I think we're always still disappointed when things go poorly. But the one thing is, when I walk into a lot of companies, pharmaceutical companies that are sometimes seen as painted as evil, you walk in and you see posters of all the things they're doing in the forests in Africa and, all over the world trying to help people in terms of vaccines. And so I'm sure there is the negative side, but it's interesting how so many companies that you think of in one way, as kind of an agent of evil or something, and then you go in and they are proud of what they're doing to help. And of course they make money too, yes. But it is interesting that within the companies they tend to view these things that we connect with as humans, and maybe that's helped in terms of changing, changing their ideas and values, from that standpoint.
Other organizations you have worked with are police departments.
Yes.
And, there's a big controversy nationwide about police departments, about shooting, about targeting minorities, and all that sort of things.
Yes.
How difficult is to change the culture of police departments when it comes in dealing with the general public?
Yeah, I think it is difficult. I think it has to start with the leaders in terms of them changing their ideas, and that permeates downward. They're the architects of the organization. So I think that is key. Where I tend to come in is I build a lot of entry level and promotional tests. So it's who gets selected to be a leader, who gets selected to be in the organization, to the extent that we can focus on the wide range of skills you need, not just the ability to use force, not just your intellect, but also on your emotional intelligence, your ability to diffuse conflict so that it doesn't become a negative event. To the extent that we build tests that select those kinds of individuals, I think that those organizations will start to reflect those changes as well, or I hope, certainly.
Well, let me ask you now a very general question, and maybe that make it difficult to answer in a few words, but how difficult is to change the culture of an organization?
I think it's incredibly difficult, mostly because humans can be pretty stable in the way they are. And if the people reflect the culture, people don't change that easily. They're worried about change. They're afraid of change. I think that thus, in some ways, when you're trying to change the organization, you're trying to change the people. So I guess the easiest way may be to actually change the people, but that's probably not, it's probably too easy a way out. So trying to build things that help a company move forward is difficult in terms of change. To the extent that they feel they're in crisis, they're a bit more open to change. It's when they feel more comfortable where they're at that it's difficult to get them to change, at least from my experience.
Do you think that public organizations are more difficult to change than private ones?
I think they both are. I'm not sure about that. I think there's definitely differences between private and public in terms of the bureaucracy, in terms of a number of the things in terms of public organizations. I think the speed of change may be a bit different for those two once they're ready to change. But in terms of them just being open to change, it feels like government, public organizations, private organizations, that they're all defensive when it comes to changing until they're ready. And that's what I mean by sometimes when they're in crisis, then they're more ready to change.
How much of a power has the leader of an organization to generate cultural change? Because you may try to change the middle management or something like that,
right.
But I believe at the end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong, it is the way the leader projects him or herself that will change the way people operate at the organization.
Absolutely. I think the leader's values, their personality is reflected in the organization. And to some extent, therefore, what they believe in is what the organization believes in. In some ways, the whole organization forms around what their beliefs are. And so I think the leader can have a huge impact on the organization, on change, and on its culture to begin with.
Now, part of the work that you do, you have to interview the employees of organization.
Yes.
To get an idea of how they feel, all that sort of things. Are people sometimes afraid of not speaking up because of fear of retaliation? And how do you deal with that particular obstacle?
Yeah, I think it's in building a relationship with them. So I completely agree with you. So we kind of go in And when we speak to people, we acknowledge that they're putting themselves at risk. We try to talk about what we do. We try to talk about the ethics of our field, being in the field of psychology, and that we're going to be careful with the information that they give. We always say that if they don't feel comfortable saying something, they shouldn't. And I think the more we speak with them, the more relaxed they get. And a lot of the ones that have long tenure in an organization say, I don't care who knows. I'm willing to tell you these things. So if you build the right kind of relationship with them, I think that they're pretty open with us. And then we're careful with the information. We try to feed it back at a level where a person can't be pinpointed, those kinds of things. And I think that helps, definitely.
Okay. The other issue that we're facing today in organizations is about the issue of diversity. And I know you have working in that area. And here is what many people say, okay, you can make a lot of efforts in terms of recruitment, diversity people, but sometimes you don't pay enough attention to the retention of those people. How do you deal with that in organizations?
I think that's absolutely the case. A lot of my clients in pharmaceutical, clients that I've dealt with, particularly in financial services and IT, where they aren't retaining women and minorities. A lot of times we're able to make progress on who's coming in, and then we turn around and we look at the other side and we see that people are going out the other side. And so I think you're right that you have to look at the whole system. If not, you'll make a change in one place and you'll forget that it's going to ripple through the rest of the organization. And so the key thing is to have multiple efforts going on at the same time. Meaning if you're bringing people in that are diverse, you need to worry about, are they going to feel comfortable there? How are you going to make them feel comfortable there? Do you need to change the leadership in terms of diversity so they feel supported, that they see themselves reflected in the leaders? And those are kinds of some of the lessons we've certainly learned in terms of diversity.
Now, the other thing, because when we say diversity, most people think in terms of race or ethnicity. And sometimes gender.
Yes.
Which is a problem, especially with corporate America. We are still dealing with that.
Definitely.
But there is another aspect that some people don't really realize that has to do with intellectual diversity.
Yeah.
And I bring this up because in many organizations, they tend to hire people who think or were educated like them.
Yeah.
Do organizations realize that it is not just about the color of your skin, but also about the way you think, and that they have also to be very accommodating and actually very welcoming of people who think differently than you do?
Yeah, I think they don't realize that. I think one of the problems with our human resource systems is they appropriate that, they make that occur, which is that the amount of homogeneity within a work organization, from the point that you're standing, how we see things, our beliefs, our ideas, even our personality, it's incredibly homogenous, which is incredibly dangerous to the organization, because as the environment changes around it, it's kind of like going to Vegas and putting all your money down on one card. And maybe it's a good card, but then maybe the environment changes and it's no longer a good card, and you've built your whole system around one way of seeing things. I think organizations don't realize it. I think my science doesn't do a great job with it. We tend to select the perfect person, not a range of people. And so I think it is a huge problem that organizations face, and I don't think they know how to handle that.
Now that you mentioned about selecting the perfect person, let's talk about something I know you have worked on, which is the concept of fit.
Yeah.
You are the right fit.
Yes.
When I hear that phrase, that he or she wasn't the right fit, I sometimes sounds more like an excuse than anything else.
Right.
Tell us about how you see that
Sure.
particular issue.
Yeah, fit is an interesting thing. It depends, as you would say, fit on what. And if it's too much good fit, then you end up with a very homogeneous outcome. I would say it's much more fitting to the type of organization that you're dealing with. So when we build measures of fit, we ask about, how you like to work. Do you like to work in a structured setting or a non-structured setting? Do you like to work with teams or do you like to work by yourself? Do you believe in hierarchy and leaders kind of being very directive with you, or do you like to have a lot more say? And so we ask them a lot of questions about the way they like to function and the way they think they'll be most effective, and then we try and fit that profile to the organization's profile. And hopefully then they end up in a place where they feel much more comfortable from that standpoint. But there's still a danger to that it leads to too much fit and therefore a very homogeneous outcome.
Now, one thing, and you are not the first IO psychologist that I have met or have spoken about things and all that kind of things. And I have been in academia for many, many years, more than I can count. Right. But I always wonder, I have never seen an institution of higher education that employs IO psychologists to advise their leadership about the institution.
Right.
Why is that?
People, most organizations don't put human resources and human capital high up when it comes to making strategic decisions. They're going to rely on finance, marketing, R&D even. They're going to rely on other pieces of the organization. So sometimes you look at what we do and you would say we should be advising, but in some ways we haven't made the case. We haven't been compelling enough. And I think we need to continue to do a good job at that and increase our influence in that way. But I think it is a battle that we're continuing to fight. I don't think we've been successful. I think we've had some successes, but we haven't been successful overall.
And I think that in this particular sector, that's very much important, because if there are organizations that don't like change and react always negatively to change, are academic institutions. Don't tell me about this new thing, because the people get nervous.
Right.
And that combined with the fact that the whole concept of tenure make our institutional higher education much more difficult to adapt to changes.
Absolutely. They do. And I don't think you see a lot of huge changes within a lot of academic institutions from that standpoint. Yeah. And I think they kind of stay pretty stable in some ways, unless there's an emergency or a crisis. So I agree with you. And in terms of why they don't talk to IO psychologists, I think that we don't have a high profile, when it comes to organizations. I mean, I think they don't always know of us, or that we exist, or what kinds of feedback and advice we could provide. So I think that's what happens.
How close do people in your profession work with the marketing branch of organizations in advising their leadership about how they need to present themselves, not only to the external constituencies, but also to the external constituencies, but also to the internal ones? Because I think not only what you communicate, but the way you communicate it has a tremendous importance.
Yeah, I think all functions within an organization, to the extent that they're using IO psychology as a way of assessing their leaders and their capabilities, and focusing on things like building internal customers and providing good service internally, being partners, marketing, being partners with sales, and those kinds of things. To the extent that we're helping with that, I think in those ways we're able to help the functions of the organization work better together. To the extent that we're not involved with that, then I don't think we have, obviously, any impact. Yeah.
Since you teach students, do you see that in the newer generations, the millennials and so on, they really have a grasp of the importance of the kind of work that you do? So when they get into a position of power, whether it is in private sector, in governmental organization, and all that, they will say, hey, I remember these classes I took on IO. Let me call, someone in that area to help me out. Do you think they get that?
I think more and more of that is happening, yes. I do. I agree. I mean, I think the more that, not only that people graduate from our master's or doctoral programs and go into higher levels within the organization, then they remember what could be brought. And so I think there is a change happening that way, and it'll raise the profile of the field. And I think that they will reach out for advice and help because they're aware of what could be done. So one thing that we always push in our classes is trying to show what can be done. here's an example, here's another example. And I think that that helps with that process.
Now, when you teach students in your area, what kind of examples do you use that will startle them to tell them, listen, these people are fundamental for the well-being of organization? Give us a couple of examples of things in real life that has happened that you tell, look how we help to solve this problem.
Sure. I think when you look a year ago when all the data came out about the lack of women in IT positions out in Silicon Valley, I use that as an example, which was we've worked with a lot of companies that try to assess talent to be selected into IT jobs. And I show them examples about how we can put in place testing systems that yield women into those roles at an equal rate to men. And so that seems to resonate with them when you're able to show them those kinds of examples. I give them examples around places that I've been in that have shown, decades of discrimination, and maybe have even lost a lawsuit over that, where we've then come in to revamp their training systems and their performance evaluation systems so that they're fairer to people from all backgrounds. And so those seem to be the kinds of things that I point to the most when I talk to the students, because I think it'll resonate with them. I think that the young students believe more in diversity. They believe in the business case for it. They think it's just an important part of how organizations are effective. And so I try to use examples that aim at that, because I think that'll resonate the most with them.
To what extent do you have to emphasize the fact that you may think you are not a racist or a misogynist, but there is something called unconscious bias?
Sure.
And you need some training to figure out that, yes, there's such a thing in you,
Right.
and that you need to do something about it.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of work with that. So I do make them aware of it. And a lot of them are aware of it. It's become very popular lately, I think, to talk about the unconscious bias. I think it's interesting, and it's a great device for them to realize that even they may have bias. So I think it's really good that way. The only thing is that I always try and describe all the rest of what's occurring that drives the bias that happens. But I do think that unconscious bias is an important part of that system.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to Dr. Goldstein for very entertaining and interesting conversation about industrial organizational psychology that probably most people didn't know about. Right. What exactly you do with that. And next week, we're going to have Professor Rick Rodriguez of the English department, who will be talking about literature and American culture. So stay tuned.
This has been College Talk with Dean Aldemaro Romero Jr., a production of the Weissman School of Arts and Sciences. All rights reserved, 2018.